Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. Today, we've got a very special episode in the sense that we will be discussing the current events that are unfolding in the Middle East and specifically in Iran. So, John, for our listeners who have had their phones closed for the last couple of days, what's happening? What's going on?
Yes, Diane. So we're currently in the sixth day of a conflict between Israel, the USA, and Iran, predominantly. However, more countries are starting to join, European nations and also those in the Gulf region. And we'll talk about those other nations in a second. But initially, what has actually been happening for the past 6 days between the US and Israel and Iran? So on the 28th of February, there were US and Israeli attacks. And on that day, Ayatollah Khayyar Meni was killed. I was with Dan that day. We were having dinner, and we literally looked up on our phones and we said, "Wow, we got all these notifications all at once. Wow, Khayyar Meni's been killed." We were astounded at the time, weren't we?
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't even know if it
so
was real as well, but now
yeah,
it has been confirmed.
and it's fairly astonishing. So this happened 6 days ago, as I mentioned. Khamenei was the supreme leader of Iran, a position he had held since 1989. And from 1981 to 1989, he had been president. He was a well-renowned dictator in the Middle East. He ruled on Iran, a country which has got sort of economic importance because of its location next to from over which 20% of the world's oil and gas travels across. And he was also known for being a brutal dictator. Those protests in January, he became almost, I think, he became sort of perhaps at the front page of the news. He killed 30,000 protesters, which almost ignited this conflict between him and Trump. However, as I've mentioned, since the 28th of February, after those initial US and Israeli attacks, a conflict, almost a war, as we are now describing, has emerged in the region. Iran attacked US associated assets in the Gulf region. So these were countries such as Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, now Saudi Arabia and Oman, and Cyprus. These are because these are countries with alliances or allegiances towards the United States of America. And it's fairly astonishing in that we are seeing what people are calling perhaps the major war of the 21st century. What could become that? Trump envisages this war to last at least 100 days, he has said. So it's making the world sort of wait in peril. What do you think about this, Diane? This conflict so far for the last 6 days has dominated the headlines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, as you've mentioned, John, this is a very, very, very dangerous situation because on one side you've got the Ayatollah, who are in a bit of a desperate position. Their leader was killed. They're sort of in this middle of this new election now, this conclave-like election with a couple of frontline candidates, including Khamenei's son. Khomeini's son, so the first Ayatollah's son, he's in the sort of frontrunners as well. But you've got this situation there, and then you've got sort of Netanyahu's pressure on Iran. Iran's been launching a couple of missiles, shot down in Azerbaijan, shot down in Turkey. I mean, what is going on? It is very, very, very strange, I think, and also has shown a lesson to Europe. I think there have been some that have just followed him blindly, and some that have actually taken it back. Especially, the US doesn't have a great track record when it comes to Iran and the region. Just not a good track record at all. I mean, if we think 32 years ago, that the Iraq War, the doctor document. I mean, there is no document now. It's just based on vibes. Netanyahu says
Yeah.
they're weeks away from a bomb, and okay, apparently
Yeah.
so. I mean, he's been saying that for 30 years, but apparently now it's for real.
Yeah, Trump's motives for the war, it should be said, was to sort of preemptive. He described them as he believed that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. There isn't any evidence that Iran was doing this.
Zero.
However, I do think it should be said that Khamenei was trying to. He did express intent to. However, there's a big difference between suppose, expressing intent to develop a nuclear weapon and actually having developed one. So it is sort of known where along that process he was. Obviously, Israel was involved because Iran has been notably the backer of many groups against Israel. So Hamas,
Yeah.
Hezbollah in Lebanon, a group which Israel have engaged in conflict again. So yes, but also Iran's of vital importance to the USA, and it's and sort of creating this idea in the world order today of Trump's modern gunboat diplomacy. Only a few months ago, we were probably talking at this very moment, right here on Zencast, we record the podcast about Trump's attack upon Venezuela.
Yeah.
We were talking about Trump's attack of Venezuela, how this was modern gunboat diplomacy. Trump was almost invading a foreign country then, sort of.
Yeah.
Well, he's taken it a step further here. And I think the scale of the Iranian attacks has been fairly astonishing. Luxury hotels in Dubai have been attacked. It's in particular these drones which have sort of almost rained down upon other cities in the Arabian region, Qatar, Bahrain, and
Also the
even airports
missiles.
have been affected.
The missiles
Missiles,
in Azerbaijan,
yeah,
Turkey, they had to shoot down one. So
yeah,
it's a very dangerous time. I get a bit of comfort from knowing that the Charles de Gaulle, which is the French flagship anti-missile um, ship, I guess, is deployed in the Mediterranean to intercept any ballistic missiles targeted at Europe. Also, the fact that there is a new, highly modernized, highly powerful shield in Romania uh,
right,
against ballistic missiles. Again, this sort of one of the main NATO protection areas against missiles from the Middle East is in Romania. So I'm quite put at ease by those two things. But I think, especially in the Middle East, there is a very, very active conflict. And we've seen attacks in Cyprus, we've seen
yeah.
damage there, and we've seen damage in the Arabian Peninsula, as you said. But, John, how do you comment on the sort of fact that you've got all these people from Dubai, all these influencers, sort of posting videos that the UAE government keeps me safe?
Yeah. I don't know about the situation there regarding the UAE government, but the UAE and its British expat population, which is one of the largest in the country and in the region in general, it's raised many interesting links to what is Keir Starmer doing. Because there is a vital British interest in this area, not only from a military angle, British bases in Cyprus, in Bahrain, in Oman, but also there's a large British population there. There's been things on social media about the UAE government protecting all the expats there, all the citizens, and I'm not
Propaganda.
social media tactics, but the UK government are trying to sort of do flights out the Middle East. It's very difficult. As of the time of recording, I'm not sure if the first flight's actually left.
Yes, they have. They have.
Has it left? It's left, but
Some
it
have
will be
landed as
very
well.
difficult. It will be very difficult because it's flying now from Oman. However, only recently Iran's now started targeting Oman. So there's further complications with that. So it is a very difficult situation. And there's many people who will be unfortunately stuck in the region for the foreseeable future. But as you mentioned there, Diane, Sir Keir Starmer has been pulled into the conflict because of Cyprus. Cyprus was attacked by targeted drones, Israeli one-way single-attack drones. And it's raised the question of what should Starmer's role in the conflict be. This has been a huge wedge in between him and Trump, obviously. Starmer has currently, as of the moment, because it is changing in classical Starmer U-turn fashion, he has allowed Trump to use UK bases, that's Fairfield and Gloucestershire, Diego Garcia, as well, for defensive purposes only. Additionally, he sent over some more F-35 fighter jets over to the Middle East, and he's planning to send over H Dragon. However, the perhaps embarrassing state of the Royal Navy has been shown by how the deployment of HMS Dragon has been delayed due to, I think it was welding issues. They had to do some final welding. The ship wasn't even ready to go. So it's really called into question Trump's and Starmer's relationship. Trump has called Sir Keir Starmer no Winston Churchill, and then he's even grown it. He's apparently now privately calling Sir Keir Starmer a loser. So it's fairly astonishing how this conflict has really exposed the true nature of Trump and Starmer's relationship. Starmer, and I'll ask you for your thoughts about this in a second, Dan, but like Pedro Sanchez, Starmer is standing up to Trump a bit more. He's not willing just to go with whatever Trump says. And I think there's a slightly admirable quality in that, even if it's not the right decision from Starmer, his action regarding the Middle East. What do you think, Diane?
Look, I think Starmer needs to be very careful
Yeah,
because the sort of last long-standing Labour Prime Minister that has won an election with
yeah,
the majority that Starmer has won an election is Tony Blair. And Tony Blair
yeah,
has done a very big mistake of doctoring a document and getting involved in Iraq.
yeah,
Simple as that, basically. And Starmer's obviously very careful because he doesn't want to repeat that mistake. Now, he has said there is no international law basis for this attack, and he is right. This is a completely illegal war in every shape and form. This is again, there is no document, there is no threat. This has just happened. Trump and Netanyahu have decided to start. I don't think, on the other hand, Starmer has played this quite as strongly as Pedro Sanchez, maybe for some
yeah,
other
yeah,
reasons. I think Pedro Sanchez has done the right thing here, which has made this very bold, very sort of attacking speech, saying that we can't play Russian roulette with the lives of millions of people, calling for a cease in hostilities, and saying that he will not be bullied into doing something that is wrong by Trump. Very, very true. A couple of days ago, we've seen Emmanuel Macron go and announced publicly that France is going to develop a nuclear arsenal again, and rammers when it comes to their nuclear arsenal, as well as nuclear submarines, as well as stop the transparency around France's nuclear program. Macron has called the next 20 years time an era of nuclear weapons. So we've got, on one hand, Macron starting preparations for independence, and he's done this nuclear shield, he calls it, around some countries in Europe. Then you've got Pedro Sanchez, who's done this very strong speech that has backfired slightly, in that now Trump is calling him a loser as well, and is going to demand tariffs. However, economically speaking, Spain and the US don't have a relationship that is as strong as perhaps the UK and the US. So Spain's exports, only about 5% of those account to those to the US. And actually, the US has been on a
okay.
surplus, on a trade surplus with Spain recently. So Pedro Sanchez doesn't really, is not really affected by that. It's not like him stopping trade with France, for example, which really hurt his economy. Starmer, on the other hand, is
Yeah,
stuck. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment because he relies on the US for
yeah,
trade and for other things. However, he knows instinctively this is the wrong action. It can really backfire on him. It can make him go from one of the prime ministers who's a bit forgettable to a prime minister in the sort of, region where you're remembered forever for starting an illegal war and
yeah,
sending British troops to die in an illegal war in Iran. What we also need to keep in mind is that the Ayatollahs aren't playing. You know, they've got no
yeah,
regard for human rights, no regard for the Geneva Convention, and they will stop at nothing. That in case there are British soldiers that arrive, they will stop at nothing to defeat them.
yeah.
Chemical weapons, probably biological weapons. Who knows? But it's not going to be a sort of fair fight, right? We know that. So I think
Yeah.
he's done the right decision. I think he's done the right decision. I don't think the UK should get involved on a moral principle. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, perhaps morally they shouldn't, but I think, as you said there are many practical difficulties. The UK and Sir Keir Starmer, we depend on the USA in a military sense. In a relationship sense, this special relationship is really relationship, a dependence for us. We depend on the USA in our foreign policy and in a military sense. So that's why I think leaders such as Kemi Badenoch was saying at the day of recording on Thursday, the 5th of March, was saying we should get involved because we almost have to follow the USA, which is a slightly unfortunate situation, but it's probably true. And I think an interesting way of looking at this is just the decline of the British military. Our presence in the Middle East is a mere shadow of what it was. Before the conflict, I think there was one Royal Navy vessel there, and I think it was either a patrol ship or a minesweeper. If you go back a couple of decades ago, the situation was very different. Large presence there. As I mentioned, that destroyer we've been sending over has had delay due to effectively construction works on it, almost equipping it out ready for war. So it's fairly astonishing, but we do depend on the USA because of this decline in the British military, brought about by successive governments, Tory and Labour, who have brought about spending cuts to the military. You mentioned another idea there, Diane, which was troop deployment. That may happen in the future, and it will be interesting to see what happens in this conflict. But I think a key thing to consider, and which you mentioned there, is a change of leadership in Iran. Trump can end this war perhaps sooner if he can have a change in leadership in Iran, raise our the former Crown Prince's son, who has been mentioned. However, an issue which is emerging is the level of support for Pahlavi. I've personally been astonished to see that in the UK there are supporters of Meni, something which astonishes me. But actually, this weekend in London, there's supposed to be marches in favour of Meni, and it raises the question of why didn't Trump attack Iran back in January, where there were huge protests in the capital of Tehran.
Yeah.
Against Meni, and that could have brought about a change in leadership there. So I think a key thing about this Iran situation is who becomes the next leader. If Trump could secure a strong leader that would help the US situation or help stabilize the region, it could be more beneficial. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think you've made a couple of interesting points there. I think just sort of as a bit of background. So Reza Pahlavi, he has been deemed by Trump as not an option. Trump has said not an option. We need someone from the inside, which I find very counterintuitive. You know, why do you want someone who's in the country and has been in bed with the Ayatollahs to keep running the country?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Which to me, and also you mentioned hasn't been attacked in January. This to me screams like an operation that has not been planned, hasn't been thought through. It's just happening, and they're sort of figuring it out as they go. It's not good practice, and also they are playing Russian roulette with millions of lives, basically.
Yeah.
Another side of it is who actually is going to take over the Ayatollah leadership now. We'll find out in a couple of days, I think, but I've mentioned Meni Jr., possibility, again, a hardline fundamentalist clerk. Meni Jr., bit more moderate, but again, you know, being the son of the first Ayatollah of Iran and being called a moderate isn't really what you need.
Not so moderate, yeah.
No, so find the whole stance that Trump is playing absolutely farce. You know, this is like him going to Venezuela and saying that Maria Machado is not a strong candidate with support. I mean, it's just a joke. You know, he hasn't thought this through, and he wants someone. What I think he's looking for, he wants someone in the Ayatollahs to switch sides, start kissing his ass, basically.
Which wouldn't happen. And I think the issue with managing a country like Iran, which is a huge country, Iran, it's got a very large population. It's I think it was 90 million. It could be. It's obviously got links to terrorist groups. It's got links to insurgency groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. It's vital economically for the world's gas and oil shipping. So it's a very difficult situation of getting a leader there who Trump can trust and the West can trust, who'll do the right job. And I think it can't come from the Khamenei camp simply because of the atrocities he's committed. However, there probably is difficulties in just sort of almost shipping someone in who perhaps doesn't know the situation as well. Iraq set a precedent of how it is very difficult to almost set up camp in a country and to manage it. Trump recognized he couldn't do it in Venezuela, for example. So I think there are many challenges in what actually happens. And you mentioned an interesting idea there, Dan, about Starmer's hesitancy earlier on. I was listening to the Political Currency podcast by Ed Balls and George Osborne, a competitor of Debatable Discussions, however, probably definitely a lot more views, but nonetheless a competitor. And I think Ed Balls made a good point about Starmer, perhaps. And that is Starmer's hesitance could be linked to this aftermath of the Iraq War, which hangs over the Labour Party. The war exposed many things of perhaps one shouldn't be too hasty to engage in conflict. But another idea is that it can go on for a very long time. It's hard to manage these situations. Is Trump going to engage in a real full-scale invasion of Iraq? That would be very difficult to manage. So I think it raises so many questions about the impracticalities of this. Perhaps Starmer's response hasn't been the right one so far, but perhaps a level of hesitancy is correct because many don't know what Trump's next move will be.
I agree. I find it a bit difficult to grasp the sort of almost fanaticals for the UK can get involved, which have been happening. There have been people who are almost fanatically saying that he should have said, yes, let's go all in, bases. I mean, you know, this is an illegal war.
Yeah.
The Labour Party in the UK don't need two illegal wars in succession.
Yeah.
Iraq and Iran.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose what does the term an illegal war even mean anyway?
Anymore, yeah.
But anymore. It's sort of, But just to summarize quickly, today we've been discussing the current US-Israel-Iran conflict, which, as we've described, has almost now included many European countries and even those outside of Europe. It's had huge effects, leading to rising oil prices by a few percent. South Korea's stock market index, Kospi, posted its largest ever fall on Tuesday of 12%. Similarly, I think in particular the Asian financial markets have taken a particularly harsh effect from it. I think they have recovered as of the time of recording. But nonetheless, this war's had a huge impact. As Trump has said himself, though, he doesn't want this war to last a few days. Unfortunately, I mean, Trump intends for this war to last at least 100 days, which is fairly astonishing thinking about the effects of this. How will people who are stuck in the Middle East get out? So yes, it's all to play for, I suppose, in many ways, Dan, and there'll be many more episodes, I'm sure, by us on it.
Yeah, definitely. And if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to leave us a comment, leave us a like, leave us a review. Tell us what you enjoyed and also what you didn't enjoy. And we hope everyone listening, either from the Middle East or with family in the Middle East, is safe and doing as best as they can during these tough and challenging times. And we will see you next week with a very special episode. We are interviewing a current politician, and it should be a very interesting conversation about what we've just talked about now, but also some other more domestic issues.
Yeah. We'll see you then.
See you then.